series this past fall with actually was a convocation talk with Dr. Sally Tinkle, who is the Deputy Director of the National Nanotechnology Coordinating Office. And since then, we've had Professor Winternitz from University of Montreal on partial differential equations. Then we had a manufacturing talk from the founder of International Center for Leadership in Education, William Daggett. And then we went back to nanotechnology talk with Dr. Ludwig Martinu of Polytechnic University, where there was a little bit of mix of art and nanotechnology. And then we also had a very renowned pollster and political analyst, John Zogby, with a talk in February. And then one after that, the last talk was on robotics from Mike Gennard, professor at Whistler Polytechnic Institute. It is my great pleasure to actually have a slightly different twist to our series, sort of very interdisciplinary area where information technology meets your mind. So today our presidential lecture series speaker is Dr. Selmer Bringsjörd from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Dr. Bringsjörd is actually, his background is in philosophy. He has his undergraduate degree in philosophy from University of Pennsylvania and a doctorate also in philosophy from Brown University. A very distinguished scholar. And also, he is sort of, he's been able to take this, the mind, expand it into other areas of science, cognitive science, and others. And presently, he is a full professor at RPI in the Department of Cognitive Science, also the Department of Computer Science, and the Laleh School of Management Technology. He teaches artificial intelligence and also logic and human-machine interaction, and among other very exciting topics. So on behalf of SUNY IT, our community, I welcome Dr. Selmer Bringsjörd for today's talk, Toward Mathematizing the Man Who Never Was. Dr. Bringsjörd.
Much. Okay, I think we're in business there. Thank you so much, Wolf. It's really an honor to be here on what we were discussing earlier is hopefully the last day of winter. That's what the news told me this morning here in Utica. Last day of winter, meteorologically speaking. We'll see if that materializes. I do see it's going to be over 50 around these regions for apparently about 7 days in a row. We'll see, as I say, if that happens. So again, thank you very much to everyone who made it possible for me to be here, and thanks for turning out today. And thank you very much to a number of sponsors. The affiliations that Wolf mentioned, department-wise, are accurate, but I'm here first and foremost, I think, representing my laboratory and the various people who make it possible to run that lab, and that includes not just RPI, but it includes outside sponsors. And I say thank you to them. It's very important to realize that this is toward mathematizing the man who never was. This work is very preliminary, and as I'm going to tell you in a moment, this is work that I'm undertaking on speculation. So builders build houses sometimes on speculation, which means they don't have any buyer for them. But they go ahead and build them, and then once they build them, they think they can sell them and make a profit. Well, researchers have to do the same thing. So I'm trying to move much more aggressively into deception and counter-deception on speculation, lay a foundation technologically, and then see if I can attract the kind of funding that would make it possible to join with graduate students, colleagues, to do this in earnest And speaking of which, Naveen right here is a PhD student in computer science, and another collaborator here down at the Institute for Human and Machine Cognition is important in this work, and then there have been many others. So let's get started. Currently, my lab is fortunate to have a number of sponsors, but none of this work relates directly to what you're going to be hearing about today. I put IBM in here because apparently we're going to be charged with the task of making Watson smarter, and that should be very exciting. So what I'm doing, and we're expecting to hear word about a large initiative in the intersection of formal logic and robotics, in particular with an ethical twist to it. So Wolf told you about my philosophy background by enumerating the 2 degrees, the undergraduate and graduate. The truth of the matter is I really don't know that much about philosophy. I kind of just fake it. I know a lot more about logic and was castigated repeatedly during my career at probably both places to the effect that you really ought to learn more about philosophy proper, Selmer. So as I said, this move into deception and counter-deception is on speculation. And so I can't give you some really, really sophisticated demos at this point. Now, what is our approach overall in the lab? We do what might be called human-level artificial intelligence. AI is a very big field, arguably gigantic if you look at the definitive textbook, for example, by Russell and Norvig. So there are lots of people doing lots of things in AI. But what we try to do is start with human ingenuity as input and then try to figure out how to build a machine that can at least approximate this ingenuity. And so the first step is to isolate the ingenuity you're concerned about. It's got to be, for us, higher level cognition. So it's got to involve decision making or reasoning or communication using natural language. And it might involve creativity, which is very, very relevant to what I'm telling you about today. Once we do that, we have to formalize this activity somehow. Computers are not particularly good at understanding raw natural language, for example, English. You have to spoon feed them by using some form of formalism. In general, we would say that's a commitment to mathematics to make it possible for the machine to understand. So you have to do that. Then you have to implement what you've done at the design level in terms of data structures and algorithms. This is probably coming as no surprise to anyone in here. And once you implement, you check it out, see if it's good. In our case, the one core technology is automated theorem proving, which is basically machines able to prove theorems automatically. That technology keeps advancing every year steadily and has been going on since the dawn of AI in 1956. It's one of the original AI technologies. And then figure out how, as needed, to augment the system that you've built with machine-specific techniques that might not be reflective of human ingenuity, creativity, et cetera. And then finally, you want to turn the system over to the sponsor. If it's a more applied work, then this has to be a very stable, usable industrial system. So this is what I do with tons of help from graduate students, primarily, and other colleagues, over and over and over again. This is the sequence. Now, in this particular case, I've got the sequence on the left. What is our aim in this particular case? Well, we have two aims. The human ingenuity in question is the age-old Haversack ruse. The Haversack ruse arguably goes back to the original Trojan horse. It's basically the idea that for the most part, military operations, you can deceive your opponent, you can deceive the enemy, in a very, very interesting way. You can give them some information about your own plans, and these plans that are left for the enemy to find are not accurate. But they come to believe that what you've left is not only accurate, but could be a game changer for them, and they change their plans accordingly. Now, in the most recent book about Operation Mincemeat, which we'll talk about momentarily, there's a nice history given for the Haversack ruse and some very colorful characters through the ages who have perpetrated this, not always successfully, but when it succeeds, it can be very devastating for the enemy. And in the case of the Nazis in World War II, it was remarkably successful. So we want to focus on the Haversack ruse. Unfortunately, this is a gigantic undertaking from the standpoint of AI, because these ruses are some of the most elaborate stories that humans can create. They are at the level of Hollywood scripts and actually beyond, because not only is it just a fiction that you're putting on the movie screen or at that level, but you actually have to have the physical objects that stand up to, you can't use industrial light and magic. You have to have the objects that stand up to scrutiny and deceive the enemy. There is a version of deception out there very relevant to today's cyber warfare that is only going to get more and more intense, and that is the example of spearfishing. And if you're not familiar with spearfishing, I'll tell you about it later, but basically I'm sure everyone here has received emails from people that don't exist, or from someone else masquerading as someone you know, and if you click on that link, that would be a very bad thing. And that's really a variant of the Haversack ruse. And then secondly, as a target, this is what we need to hand over to the sponsoring organization, to the federal government or whoever it might be. We want to hand over soft bots or robots or artificial agents that can do one or perhaps two things. Number one, they have to be able to generate these ruses. Okay, they have to be able to deceive themselves automatically. You say, why don't we leave that up to the humans? Well, you can leave it up to the humans, and humans do it, and we're looking at that case. But as an AI person, that really doesn't cut it. The AI person wants to take the human intelligence and then figure out how it can be turned into machine intelligence. Besides which, machines are going to increasingly deceive each other as we go forward into the age of cyber warfare. So we will have to build machines that are able to perpetrate deception against other machines. And secondly, we want machines to unmask deception when we encounter it. So there should be protective systems in place against people launching cyber attacks, and in particular spearfishing on companies and organizations in the United States and, for example, Canada, and the machines should be picking up on things automatically. So this is the goal. Now, in order to do this in my method, you have to use logic. You have to use formal logic. And in this particular case, there are lots of logics out there. I don't expect this to be particularly meaningful to you. I don't know that you'll understand these categories. Josh just mentioned that some of the work that he's doing these days is in the area of description logics, which are generally emphasized a lot for the semantic web and making the information on the web more machine usable. But in the case I'm talking about today, we use full first-order logic, and then some logics called epistemic logics, which are dedicated to modeling human belief and human knowledge and iterated human belief and knowledge. So your beliefs about my beliefs about your beliefs. That would be a third-order belief. You cannot do one of these Haversack ruses unless you have at least, and this can be shown, unless you have fourth-order beliefs. So it's very, very hard to see how anyone could do this with game theory and decision theory, which are generally not expressive enough. Now, there's background papers. I don't expect you to read on these techniques, but this is an academic presentation in no small part, so I mentioned them. Okay, there are a couple of papers that are kind of ideal for seeing how this work proceeds. And I'll leave it up to you to read those. So let me give you some quick examples of prior work that uses the same, quote, math that I'm seeking to use for modeling Haversack ruses and modeling spearfishing. And so here we go. So quickly, there's the famous, basically obligatory litmus test for anyone claiming they can do anything along this line, and that's the famous wise men puzzle, in which 3 wise men are told by the king, look, I need you to tell me whether you're wearing a white fez or a black fez, okay? And I can tell you that at least one of the three of you is in fact wearing a white fez. You can't look in the mirror, you can only look at the fezes on the other wise men. And so the first wise man says, well, I don't know. And the second wise man says, I don't know either. The third wise man is smart enough to say, oh, well, given what they said and what I see, I know I have a white fez. And we needn't go into the details of this. It'd be nice, if you haven't seen it before, a nice brain teaser for you. Basically, of course, if the first wise man, just to start the reasoning, if the first wise man had seen two black fezes on the other two, he would immediately have said, I have a white fez. But since he didn't say that, the other two wise men immediately know that they're not both wearing black fezes. And further information is provided by the second wise man to continue down that same route. Now, somewhat long ago, we used the math that I'm going to be giving you a bird's eye point of view on today, particularly a colleague of mine, Konstantin Arkutis, to show that the wise man puzzle, it had been done before for three wise men in the history of AI, but to our knowledge, no one had ever shown that this could be done for any number of wise men. And that's what we did. If you look over there, you see there's wise man puzzle sub n. So doesn't matter how many you have, we showed this can be done, and we ran the actual simulations to show that this could be done. And in fact, what we did subsequently to that work was show that, because the concern about logic-based AI is often, well, it'll be too slow to do this in the real world. But we showed that in the case of simple robots, where now the white and the black fezes have been understood in this case to be either the black or the white part of the disk, we showed that robots could run these algorithms and do this reasoning in real time. Now, in this case, it was a little darker because death was the result if you gave the wrong answer. Or if you, I think, just expressed ignorance. And it wasn't a white or black fez, it was whether you took a black pill, which killed you, I think, or a white pill, which did not. I don't know what I don't recall which it was. So in this case, the third wise man is the red, I think the red robot. Let's see, black and blue don't know. No, it's black. They don't know if they have been poisoned. And this is real perception using simple sensors. These are not complicated robots. And black says I must have been poisoned, which is equivalent to saying I must be wearing the black fez. And then black is allowed to take the antidote. Again, the point of this is that we can do this quickly. And this kind of technology would need to be deployed very quickly in the real world if we're talking about defending against emails coming in, and you don't have all day to think it through. We also have done work going back to when Josh Taylor was at RPI on the false belief task. So I think this will probably start. This is work in particular that Dr. Jackson at RPI still likes to talk about. I'm not entirely sure, but why she's so thrilled with it. I have to say we can do a lot better now. But we used Second Life to model the false belief task, which is very famous in the history of psychology. It's a test in which there are two boxes. You probably saw them there, A and B. And this teddy bear is going to be placed in box A, okay? And there it goes. And this is done in plain view of all three characters, all three agents. But now this agent is going to go away. Eddie is the subject of the experiment. Psychologists have carried out this experiment over and over again. You can do nice things like fly in Second Life. All right, so this agent's gone, and now the teddy bear is going to be moved from box A to box B, and it'll eventually happen. And then Eddie is going to be asked, now look, when, I think it's Micah, when Micah comes back, if we ask him to retrieve the teddy bear, which box is he going to look in to do that? And below the age of 4, human beings will give the new box that the teddy bear has been moved to, which makes absolutely no sense, since the person has been gone while the teddy bear has been moved. After 4 or 5 years of age, they understand, well, look, they're still going to look in the original box because that's where they think it is. And there are many variants of this. So we have some detailed simulations of this. And this goes back a while. Again, roughly using the same quote math that we're using for today's topic. Other nice thing about Second Life is that it really doesn't cause any problems. If that was in the real world, it might be physically interesting. And I don't know whether this is passing or failing, so I don't know what's going to be said here. There might be some internal peek into the reasoning of the subject as to what's going on. And let's see what Eddie says. We've about reached the key moment. So this is going on back on the machine that is the mind of Eddie. And let's see if it's passing or failing. He would look in box B. So that's failing. But from our standpoint, if we can model it and simulate it and handle the general case, then it's success. Now, recently we have been applying these techniques to nuclear deterrence and nuclear strategy. And I was tempted to switch the talk despite what I'd provided in the abstract, because our timing here seems to be, by sheer coincidence, actually exquisite. We had a chance to talk to an admiral who visited RPI about this. And so what we show in this paper, this has turned out to be our first foray. This is a massive simulation. The formulas get more and more complicated and expressive. We did our first analysis for Iran, Israel, the United States, and Russia, a 4-agent case. And we tried to augment the ordinary modeling of these kinds of scenarios with information about investment in prior effort. Because in the case of Iran, regardless of what your position is on Iran and regardless of what you think the future might look like, one thing is absolutely clear. Iran has already invested considerable time and energy in the nuclear arena. And that's very relevant in our models. So what we show, unfortunately, it's too small to see, but what we show in this case, under reasonable assumptions, is that this is a machine proof right here of the result, is that under reasonable assumptions, Iran is going to be virtually impossible to deter. And you could take, if you may want to look at the paper, you may disagree, but it's very disturbing to me. And we also have started to look at the North Korea case. Okay, so how is this possible? Well, there are dedicated papers that express the calculus that we use, which is called the cognitive event calculus. Basically, too small to see perhaps, but there is full generality of time and change, courtesy of the event calculus in the cognitive event calculus. The event calculus has been around for a while. It's a tried and true staple in artificial intelligence for modeling time and change. And it doesn't cover the cognitive realm, but it covers, it's generally designed to cover inanimate objects and then some degree of cognitive attitudes about inanimate objects and their processes through time. There are only 3 axioms, but they're highly expressive, and these are given to the machine. I mentioned the efficiency challenge. How do we enable a machine to do these kinds of proof searches efficiently? One technique is to get a tip from the human case where humans don't start from scratch every time they problem solve. They build up libraries of problem-solving techniques and then pull these techniques off the library shelf. So you have to store techniques for finding answers, and we use what are called methods for that. And there's a paper that first introduces the cognitive event calculus there. Just a quick look at some of its some of its innards. I can't go through the whole thing, but basically we have a series of rules of inference over here that allow the computer to not just deduce, in this initial work that's the emphasis, but reason and take inferential steps. And then we have a formal language over here. So we have actions, we have the notion of events that occur or happen, we have a basic scheme for time where moments come before and after. And then, so if we just take a look at one of these rules of inference to zero in on it and give you maybe a small sense of how these inference rules work, if you zero in at this, on this one here, rule R4, what is it saying? I hope you can make it out in the audience there. It's saying, look, if an agent A at time t knows that some state of affairs or some proposition phi holds, then you can immediately infer what's beneath the line that in fact phi holds. And that's rule of inference number 4. That, if you think about it, is very plausible. Everything that you know is in fact true. You can't know anything that's false. This wouldn't be acceptable if it was belief. Just because you believe something doesn't make it true. The C here is the common knowledge operator, so whenever that's used, it means that every agent in the modeling and simulation understands what comes after the C. So if we take a quick look here at the formulas that are allowed in the cognitive event calculus, we see there are basically 7 important ones. We have a notion of perception on the part of an agent, a notion of what the agent knows, common knowledge for all agents, belief, and then desire, intention, and then communication, which is going to be very important for the domain that we're talking about here, where the agents have to be able to communicate, not just in formal logic, but in English, and we have techniques for that, and that's generally where our work for IBM, by the way, in the Watson area is going to focus. Well, if there's only one occurrence here, the Greek symbol is just and here's where it is in the formal grammar. The Greek symbol represents any arbitrary formula in the system, so it's a metavariable that ranges over any formula. So you could have a formula of this type. So, for example, if Russia knows that Iran knows that the United States knows that Iran has built a nuclear reactor, it would be a formula of this type, and there would be an outermost knowledge operator, but the phi would carry all the knowledge operators on the inside. I think I mentioned a third order one, so there'd be 2 knowledge operators buried in phi. So phi is just a variable standing for arbitrarily complex formulas. The syntax, this is certainly one standard way of laying out a formal language and a so-called signature. So what it's doing is it's announcing the categories of objects that you have in your calculus. We allow objects, agents, the notion of a self. You have to have a self concept. Not particularly relevant to what we're talking about today, but we're committed to that. You have to have actions as a certain kind of event, and you have to have action types, moments for time, things can be true or false. Fluents are important in the history of AI. Fluents are basically states of affairs that change through time. So the number of people in this room changes depending on what's happening in it. After we conclude our session, it'll go to 0. So the fluent of number of people in the room would be something in that category. And then, well, let's leave it at that. Oh, the whole thing, yeah, absolutely. The whole grammar is recursive. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's top to bottom crucial for the language, the grammar, and for the processing and for the programming all the way through. Absolutely. Yeah. All right, so I backed up and I need to advance past that. So let's look at Operation Mincemeat. I'm sure that some of you are familiar with this, but for those of you who aren't, let me tell you a little bit about it. Here's the recent book. It's a little bit off screen, but there was a book written by the chief architect called The Man Who Never Was, and that's where that phrase comes from. The Man Who Never Was also a movie, and I've seen it. You may have heard of it. But this book here is the recent, much more extensive presentation of this psychological operation that was carried out. It's a story, okay? And one of the things you realize immediately when you look at this kind of work from the standpoint of AI is that if you don't have the tools in computer science, AI, or whatever, to model stories and operations on stories, you're never going to succeed in this domain. The people who came up with this idea were all, they weren't just casual writers, they were actually creative writers. In fact, this can be traced back to this gentleman right here of James Bond fame. That's Ian Fleming. Okay, it's a little bit unclear who deserves the lion's share of the credit for the first hatching of the plan, but it seems like, regardless of what your stance is, it still comes out at the level of James Bond, because it was either Ian Fleming, okay, who deserves the lion's share of the credit, or the man who Ian Fleming used as the model for M in James Bond. It was a real person in British intelligence. So story is very important. And what's really important is the notion, and I don't have these things formalized yet, okay? It's going to be apparent momentarily. But you have to have the notion of a backstory to have any chance of perpetrating a Haversack ruse. What do I mean by that? Everybody has to agree to ground truth, okay? The Nazis have to know they're fighting, let's say the Axis powers need to know they're fighting the Allies, not just the Nazis. The Allies need to know they're fighting the Nazis, okay? They have to have basic understanding of where troops are, and they have to have basic understanding of what each side is trying to do in this conflict. There has to be a backstory, and it has to be, for purposes of what we're talking about now, it has to be, as I say, ground truth. If you don't have that to start, you cannot perpetrate any of these PSYOPs. They're just not going to work, okay? So you have to have a commitment to story. Now here's the basic map for what was pulled off. Here is Sicily, here is Sardinia, and then Greece over here. So it was regarded to be, and McIntyre in his book talks about this, it was regarded to be axiomatic, okay, that the Allies had to seize control, or if you will, puncture the underbelly of, and let's say the Nazis, although it's not entirely accurate, had to puncture the underbelly to make headway to eventually get to Europe. There was no question about this in the backstory, okay? And he explains there wasn't even any doubt that it had to happen through an invasion in Sicily because of its position. But what happened was, notice the red dot coming down and going to Huelva in Spain. What happened was a corpse was dropped, okay, with all the right information on it to convince the Nazis that, in fact, Sicily was not going to be the place where the Allies invaded. They were going to invade farther north, Sardinia and Greece, but they were going to engage in a decoy operation. So they were still going to do things trying to make it seem like they were going to invade in Sicily. So what was dropped here is the man who never was. It might be a little too small to see. There's the actual corpse, one of the amazing things about McIntyre's book is that he gets to Montagu's, the chief architect, he gets to his trunk in his room long after he's died, because he picked up on a hint that Montagu had left in his account saying, and I have some very interesting documents that I was privileged to retain. And McIntyre finds them. So they're very interesting photographs. The man who never was an actual, of course, human being. The corpse was real. Unfortunately, it's a very sad story. He committed suicide. He was basically an extremely poor person who led a tough life. He committed suicide with rat poison. And one of the interesting wrinkles to the story is that in order to create the story for the Nazis, one of the first hurdles to get over was, will the Nazis be able to tell it was rat poison that killed him? And so they go to the guru pathologist, and he says, no, they'd have to be essentially as smart as me, and they're not. And there's a separate story there about that. So here we have an arrow going from Huelva to the Nazis. Within a very short amount of time, the Allies actually tracked the relevant transportation and knew that the documents were going back to the nerve center. You know, how did they do that? How could this have made any sense? Because wouldn't the Allies have known that their plans had been compromised? Well, actually, the Spaniards were remarkably adept at getting the information extracted from sealed envelopes and then put it back under the scrutiny of the Allies. You know, we had a representative there, et cetera. So the level of epistemic operators here is mind-blowing. That is, the knowledge about the belief, about the knowledge about the belief of all these agents piled on top of each other is at the level of the most intricate murder mystery ever penned by any human being. So it goes back to the Nazi nerve center, and they swallow it hook, line, and sinker. Okay? And history is changed. Now, what you see here is a banknote that was left on the body, okay, that indicates that our man is in trouble financially back at home. So there's a story, and I'm going to show you this or point to it. I mean, there's a story augmentation going on here that's compelling. Take the backstory, augment the story, get the people to read the augmented story, buy into it, affirm it, and then change their behavior accordingly. One of the late things in creating the story augmentation was this poor guy didn't have a love life. So they built a love life for him, okay? And looking back at it, it looks kind of schmaltzy, but it worked like a charm. So what I say here is just that the U.S. just as an example, a simple fact that arrives on the scene here, the U.S. knows that the Nazis believe that the U.S. is only using preparations for Sicily as a decoy, and that the Nazis are bolstering for Sardinia and Greece invasions. So the Nazis, by the way, do a double decoy, a second-order decoy, which of course is anemic, kind of embarrassing for the for the conflict. They say, oh yeah, well, I'll tell you what, we'll do decoy against their decoy. So we'll decoy getting ready for their decoy, which they did, but left this wide open, and I forget how many landings there were, but 50 or so plus landings. Okay, now if you take a deep breath, I'm going to drive you through the sequence that I see here that needs to be formalized and mechanized in the machine. So if you take a deep breath and bear with me, I think we can quickly get through this. So I'm sorry, I've got one more slide before I do that. I have to tell you that, again, this is too complex to start with. So we're talking about essentially the Chinese hacker case that was published in the New York Times. I hope some of you saw it. It was, if you read the report, it's sort of one of the most marvelously satirical things I've ever read. Because it says, well, we could be wrong, but if we were wrong, it would mean that one building in the middle of nowhere would be originating cyber activity so to the tune of an incalculable amount. So if we're wrong, you know, maybe we just don't see something, but of course that's absurd. So what is spearfishing and what were they doing? Well, there's a great example given in the New York Times article about a company in Canada where someone, an alert employee, does realize, I don't think this is from my boss. My boss is telling me to click on this link and take a look at the document. I don't know, I'm not sure about this. And goes and asks the boss, and the boss says, no, I didn't send that. But people do click on these things, and when the clicking gives remote access to a system that can be, if you will, teleoperated, lots of bad things can happen. This, by the way, again, this is our future. There's no question. I saw a great interaction with GE R&D in Niskayuna where they were talking about the business-based or the agent-to-agent internet. Most of the internet is not human communication relevant. It's machine-to-machine. And when the machines can talk to themselves and control each other, and you get remote access over some of those machines, I mean, I don't think science fiction has done justice to what we'll be looking at. But this is what I want to model as a starting case, spearfishing, that email coming in. So in order to do this, I said you have to look at stories. In AI, there's a long-standing attempt to generate stories, to understand stories, to arrange stories, and I'm introducing a new concept called story augmentation. I can't find it in AI. Okay. Story generation, I've done work on. I wrote a book about story generation with the chief architect of the Watson system at IBM. He has since moved on and left IBM, which is very interesting. But we wrote a book together on story generation. How do you get a machine to generate stories? So I've been working in that area for a long time. Too hard to see, but there's a wonderful book by Eric Mueller, ironically at IBM, about getting a machine built that can understand a story. So AI's been working on this. Story arrangement consists in taking a jumbled story. These three panes here show a woman leaving a scale, approaching a scale, and weighing herself. Of course, that makes no sense. To make it a coherent story, we have to rearrange it. And these are, believe it or not, well-defined story X areas in AI. But story augmentation is what we need to do, and I don't yet know how to do it, and I'm starting to work on the initial formal designs for this process. So if we take a deep breath, here we go. So here's what the sequence looks like if you're going to play in this game. It's common knowledge to all the agents in question for all the times that are relevant that the backstory holds. In the case of spearfishing, it's a different story than one involving the Nazis. The agent has to perceive that certain objects have come across his perceptual apparatus. This is the link in the spearfishing email. This is information that's based on the text in the email, and this refers to objects, a body, a banknote, etc., that you would see. Here, by the way, is here's a spearfishing, an actual spearfishing email that we generated in Mandarin, targeted at the Chinese hackers who were spearfishing. So this is a double agent email, if you will. It's intended to get the people doing the spearfishing to look at a copy of an email designed to spearfish. And then we have the items that I mentioned over here in connection with Operation Mincemeat. Now, given this information that's perceived by the agent, there has to be a key thing. This just means deduction. There's a key thing that's deduced. It's a series of facts involving the target for deception, A, and that target's associates, colleagues, boss, etc. So these are just a series of facts that are asserted by what the agent perceives. Okay? And the key thing here is that we anticipate that the target is going to refuse to believe at least one key fact. We'll call it psi I. So it's not the case that the target agent believes that this holds, and he doesn't believe that it doesn't hold. He's agnostic. The whole Operation Mincemeat key is that the Allies knew the Nazis would be skeptical. They would be agnostic on things. They would carry out a test or tests to make it easier to sort things out. So everyone knows that that these colleagues are going to want to carry out a test, because they know that if this thing holds, then the test has to result in a positive, in a 1. So that's the next part of the sequence. The test is carried out. It produces a positive. So in the case of the man who never was, testing autopsy results, were great. Although it appears that there was a martyr actually in the Nazi case who was willing to lie to help thwart the Nazi regime, but that's another issue. After the test is carried out, every one of these propositions that's entailed by what the agent perceives, whether it's a spearfishing email or whether it's bodies, etc., every single one of these propositions is believed by the target. This is what I can't formalize yet because I haven't figured out how to do it, so take this with a grain of salt. Everything else is very real, and I'll show you a demo momentarily. Somehow, we have an original backstory that's augmented with these additional formulas to produce a new, more detailed story. This is the story augmentation. As a result, the target agent believes the new expanded story. Given that the agent believes this new expanded story, the agent now desires that he perform a certain key action, which is, in the case of the Nazis, then bringing their forces to protect against things that weren't going to happen, namely Sardinia and Greece. In the case of an email, it's clicking on the link. That does happen. The agent does perform this action. In the case of Operation Mincemeat, the action is self-destructive troop movement. In the case of psychological operations and specifically spearfishing, it's clicking on the link. We get this person to click on the link. And that's basically the sequence. Now, I just realized I actually need some audio, but maybe I'll try to. Do we have that?
Yep, we do. Hold on.
Okay. All right, well then all right, let me advance through all that stuff there, and we only have one more slide, and then maybe we can talk a little bit. And that looks very promising. Hopefully this won't be way too loud. Now, I'll warn you in advance, people don't usually talk to themselves the way our agent's going to talk to himself. We want to just give you a sense of the stream of consciousness that's going on in the agent that accurately reflects what's happening underneath the hood in the machine. So look, we're not Ian Fleming. It's not going to sound nice, but it's real.
If our emails are top secret, and if the message header says that the mail is from a person X, I will believe that the mail is from person X. The mail address of my boss is secret. The header says it is from my boss. The email is in fact from my boss. If I perceive something, I believe that thing. I see that my boss desires that I click on this link. I believe that my boss wants me to click on this link. If I believe that my boss desires that I do a thing X, I will try to do that thing X. I believe that my boss desires that I click on this link. I will now click on this link.
It might be a little hard to see, but here's the email. This is the Mandarin. This is the email in English. We think we have an email that will cause Canada 22 to click. In the NYT article, they were talking about attacks on Canada. Canada 22 just being a real human being in Canada. We've worked on the English a lot, and all our painstaking legwork will perhaps pay off. For example, we now know the agenda of Canada 22's boss, which is the backstory. For example, needs to deliver a detailed SOW, statement of work, to National Grid ASAP. This is made up, but we could have used the actual companies. Over the next 2 weeks, there's a version of the memo for you to scrutinize at this link. And if the link is clicked on, the fish has been speared. And so what happens here is that the agent, seeing this email, reasons through and decides the story, and then the backstory and the detailed story makes sense, and then clicks on the link. I've already told you this is sort of the main mathematical tool, the CEC star. This is its most recent place of publication. And then just very quickly, last slide, I believe, which is like now we have to meet reality. We have to confront what it takes to do this kind of work at a lower level. So in terms of systems, automated theorem proving, I told you at the beginning, is key. We need computer vision. We need machine learning. We need 3D avatar technology for various reasons. We need, obviously, natural language processing. And for things that are physical, where we're using real robots, we need a robotic platform. All of this is connected sort of programmatically by automated theorem proving. We need languages. Common Lisp is a big deal in my lab. It's a staple. Python, C, C++, Java, and we need modules. And then for some of what you saw there in related work, OpenCV, Blender, text-to-speech technology, which is a commodity, not a big deal at all. This is a particular theorem prover that is useful. The Stanford parser for understanding the structure of English sentences that come in, and UNO. And then we have to put all of this together. By the way, this is all open source software. We have to put it together to make it work. And so I think that's it. Thank you. Yes? I have no idea. Not in this particular work. I have no idea what role that plays in this particular work. Naveen was using that for a Disney demonstration that Disney demonstrations that we worked on for a year, so I don't know. I literally have no idea. Yeah. I see. I see. Well, then I have a, this is not reflective of it, but I have a ridiculous amount of robots in my lab, and we have a Pelican UAV, and we're working on a demo in which it communicates with two scouts to perceive that something is worth striking. So maybe that will be relevant, but I don't know. I'm working on. If you ask me about Common Lisp and the theorem provers, it's a lot easier. But that's interesting to know. I'll have to ask Barash. We have a very bright undergraduate who is primarily working with the Pelican and is a UAV fanatic. So he may be using it. So thanks. I'll have to find out. Yeah. Yes?
I realize this question might be out of the scope of the research that you do, but what's the likelihood for a lot of this technology, the algorithms, to be able to integrate that into software that can prevent the common user from clicking on those links in the future? We're looking at
that's the point, and that's the hope. Unfortunately, there's a major obstacle standing in the way of that, and it's the same obstacle standing in the way of verifying that mission-critical things actually behave as we expect them to in the realm of software, and that is that formal methods-based work in computer science has now for decades been laughably underfunded. So we've reached a point where there probably are only 500 human beings on the planet able to do detailed, meaningful program verification. And DARPA recognizes this. They cite this phenomenon in a recent call where they seek to game source the problem. This work, and at least this approach to blocking just spearfishing attempts, but other cognitively sophisticated attempts. This is not lower level direct access cyber stuff, but anything at the cognitive level, and therefore in my space here, requires a lot of expertise with computational logics that are sufficiently expressive. So it's the objective, that's the point, but unfortunately we've ended up in a stew. In the United States, we built it ourselves, and since you asked the question, you said maybe it's beyond, out of scope. What's happened even more generally is that computer science has systematically gone in search of applications of computational X and kind of neglected, in my opinion, its core intellectual values scientifically. And because it's done that, and the funding from the federal government has accentuated that, we end up with a situation where, again, there are not too many groups that could build out these defensive technologies.
Or have the money to do it.
Right. Well, money, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. DARPA's idea is crowdsourcing. Maybe that will work. I don't know. Yes?
I keep thinking of the comparison of the way Deep Blue solves a chess game versus the way a Gary Kasparov would solve a chess game.
Right.
And can you comment on which approach, are you trying to model the way a Gary Kasparov thinks about it? Or is it really reproducing the sort of detailed step-by-step analysis?
That's a great question. It would have been manifestly imprudent, given available computational horsepower, for an AI team to say, look, we're going to forego alpha, beta, minimax search in favor of hanging out with a psychologist to help us figure out how Kasparov is actually playing chess, because he doesn't seem to be doing that. That would have been a very dumb move from an engineering standpoint, in my opinion, and I'm sure IBM is congratulating itself to this day that they did not take that approach. That was the original idea in AI, but it was a dumb idea because the game is a solvable game. We know there's a perfect algorithm for playing chess, to play invincible chess. We don't have those algorithms in the case of espionage, double agents, the Haversack ruse. We don't have them. We don't even have an algorithm that's up to generating decent stories at the level of 500 words across a number of domains. So because of that difference, our only hope, I claim, is that we look in sober, unflinching fashion at human creativity, at what humans do that's ingenious that machines still can't touch. So we really have no alternative. Now, someone from a statistical approach will come along, maybe Norvig at Google come along and say, all right, I think we can do this statistically, but don't hold your breath. Don't hold your breath. They just keep picking problems that are tailor-made for statistical processing. And in counter fraud, a great example of that would be, yes, you can pick up on anomalies in, say, medical billing, okay? But what you don't have is a model of what the criminals are doing. Why are they diverting the drugs? And what are they doing more generally with these drugs? You only get the anomaly. Then you hand it off to the human investigators. And that's why they're gainfully employed and brilliant folks. So this is a great question. And so, that's basically my answer. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yes?
In your story augmentation,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking strictly from a psychological point of view,
Yeah.
in a clinical psychological world, story augmentation often involves confabulation. So how does the modeling that you are proposing, because it's based, as you said, on logic, how does that yet take into account the possibility of confabulation?
Yeah, well, I guess I would say two things. Number one, the generation of potential PSYOPS plans is confabulation. That's why Ian Fleming came up with, in the original, if you will, candidate library, there were something like 22 ideas. Most of them were harebrained ideas, and they wouldn't pass the test. So the test is, oh, wow, that's really creative. Let's suppose we do that. What would the enemy be skeptical about? Oh, yeah, they'd be skeptical about that. How would they test? They'd do that. Oops, we failed the test. So confabulation first is venerated, as far as we can tell. I'm not a spy, but as far as we can tell from the history of these operations, these are really idiosyncratic, quirky people. I mean, they're great at generating these ideas, but not many of them stick. A lot of them fall off the chalkboard and just aren't going to work. So you want confabulation at that point, and so you want machines, for the first of what I seek to deliver, able to do lots of generation of stories, but consistent with the backstory. So the second point is, it's great to confabulate, but that's a logical relationship. To augment a story where you don't violate the constraints that are in place because of the backstory is a logical problem. If your confabulation to augment a story, this is different than advancing a story, because advancing a story, I think, is a little different in literary criticism and so forth. But if you seek to, in my sense, augment the story, and you have an inconsistency, then it fails. And that's one foothold for logic very definitely to play a role. And in fact, in the defensive mode, that is clearly one of the machine's chief advantages, is if it says in that email, okay, that the boss needs to get a statement of work done for National Grid, and National Grid is actually not the contractor or not the company that's in place for that company. Contradiction, and the machine finds it and says, whoa, wait a minute, I've got a contradiction. And machines are really good at that. In fact, contradiction finding is, again, one of these original AI problems that goes back to, well, arguably goes back to Aristotle, but 1956 people were worried about how they could make that happen. So it's very difficult, but that gives you, I think, some relevant information in response to a very good question. I think there was in that vicinity. Okay, yes?
I'm just wondering on that formal grammar that you have in the logical system of reference rules, how much scrutiny is paid to that? Once you spend all the time putting it together, I mean, is there work done on it in the sense that, that people really check it and try to develop it? Because you have to, the problem is as you ruse and try doing it, you have to include all these different kind of ideas. And also you alluded to the fact that it's very difficult to make that consistent. I wonder how much work, with people in general. It's a good thing to do.
Well, you're asking a general version of a specific question that the human race could finally ask in detailed, rigorous fashion in the 1940s. Okay? Up until the 1940s, going back to Aristotle, people just kept inventing the syntactic side of logics. But no one had a way to answer your question. So to rephrase it, it would be, okay, great. So this allows you to make valid inferences and syntactic moves, and as long as the machine doesn't get hit by gamma rays or whatever, you're going to be, well, but how do I know that the stuff that you're moving around is semantically valid in what we want? And if we let the machine do its own thing for an hour, and it ends up with a new result, how do we know that this is semantically accurate relative to the input. So in formal logic, this is based on proofs that the syntax behaves as you would like it to relative to the semantics. And I have not talked about the semantics at all. That's complicated, and for the event calculus, there's a standard model theoretic semantics. That has pretty much been done. At the level of the cognitive event calculus, more work has to happen. And so I do not have those proofs yet. But I shouldn't say that. We have proofs that with epistemic operators that you see there applied to object level information in the event calculus with our semantics, things will be as we want. But that's keeping the lid on all the rest of the formulas. So I don't exactly know how desire and intention work in the system yet. But this is a great question. So it's about going with the best engineering formalisms and technology that you have, and this I'm sure about. Your question addressed to the hotshot game theorists of the world, or the metagame theorists of the world today, or the hotshot decision theorists of the world today, would be a much tougher question for them because they don't even have their syntax formalized yet, whereas we do. But this is a great, it's tough. Yep. Uh-huh. Well, for some they have. For some programming languages they have. Right. For some they have. I mean, Haskell, things in the, and Costas worked in ML, the implementation of the wise man thing, that was an ML implementation. But you're absolutely right. This semantics problem, which is sort of, I think, why it came up here, the semantics problem matching the syntax for programming language is a major deal because you can't do, certainly in some forms you can't do program verification without that being worked out. So yeah, I mean, this is tough. Yeah. Yes?
So it looks like, if I were reading that email that said Canada 22,
Right. I
would definitely click on that. I mean, unless it was an obvious, unless I knew that National Grid wasn't our provider or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But that would be relatively easy to get right, I think. Unless there was a terrible glaring error, I would click on that. So it looks like there's no defense. Unless, it looks like everything is naked.
I would put it in conditional form. I'm not quite as depressed. I don't mean to say you're depressed, but I'm not quite as fatalistic. Let's put it that way. And the reason is because we still have a situation in the world today where the elements of the backstories are hard to obtain. I will agree with you. If you have the backstory, then it is without machines of great sophistication helping. There is very little defense. Okay? But fortunately, and you can look at this in finance as well, right? And counter fraud. Obviously, if we had a more detailed backstory, the math that showed that what Madoff was doing was impossible would have been all the more compelling. We just did not have the backstory information. And in the context of this email, you're right. The backstory, if it's perfect, it's going to produce a near irresistible email for that poor guy receiving it. That's true. Now, what the future bodes for our ability to build or ascertain elements of backstories, what I'm calling backstories, part of that relates to public policy. I don't know, but that's a challenging.
So the Chinese, or this Chinese entity,
Yeah.
Army thing, or whatever.
It's a unit.
Yeah.
It's a presumed unit, yeah.
Right. Now that's gotten into, presumably, hundreds of American firms and American defense establishments. Was it through this sort of trick?
Yeah, no, I'm not reporting any, I'm just citing the article. I'm not reporting any distressing specifics in situations where defense-related things would be compromised, okay? I'm just talking about the structures that are in place here and using the New York Times example, which in the case of Canada was a happy result because the employee apparently did flag it. But compromising computer systems, you know, in the Air Force, in the Army, or what have you, is very different than getting into National Grid's systems, in my opinion. Now, I suppose I'm going to have to, you know, as Josh, well, I've had lots of grad students who seem to know lots about these things and clearly have been, you know, experimenting with lots of things. I don't have any specific information along the lines that you're pointing to, but it would be astonishing to me if right now there aren't thousands, if not tens of thousands of people clicking on links in spoofed emails that they should not be clicking on. Now, whether it relates to one particular system or another is totally, but that, it would be astonishing to me. It seems psychologically, if you will, impossible. We are talking about human beings who thought the ELIZA system of the 50s was actually a Rogerian psychotherapist. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Actually, you know, usually my staff, they just click on the trash button when they receive emails from me. So that's sort of a
That's effective,
right.
In a sense.
So as a last, not only as a not as a last installment of the President's Lecture Series, but for commemorating your visit to SUNY IT, this is a President's Medal for
wow.
And
wow, thank you so much, Wolf. Thank you so much. Wow, that's an honor. It's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Just a quick public service announcement. So this ends the 2012-2013 President's Lecture Series, but the Provost Lecture Series, where we celebrate